for the Mystery Quilt of Desert Lily Quilters for 2025. And I wanted to start with the supplies that I use and I think that would be useful to you. The first one is an add-a-quarter ruler, and these come in different sizes. This is a 12-inch, and it also comes in a 6-inch. Doesn't really matter, I just think it's easier to use the 12-inch in this particular instance. But if you don't have that, you can also use just a regular ruler, and just make sure that you put the 1/4-inch line here on your fold of your fabric. This one has a lip, and so you can see that you hook it over the fold of your fabric, and then you would cut. The other thing that I use is this papers for foundation piecing, and there's many different brands of it. Some of it is wash away. You don't really have to use the paper. You can just use cheap printer paper. This is just a little bit easier to tear off, so that's your choice also. So you can save paper. Now, if you print it on a printer, it's important that you notice that this needs to be 4.5 inches. If it's less, some printers will allow you to increase the size to 103% or 110%, whatever you need to get this to be 4.5. But if you can't get it to be 4.5, don't panic. We have what we call the fudge factor that we're going to include on each block, and that will be that you will put a border around each block so you can make them perfect 10.5-inch blocks. You want to cut out your pattern on the outside lines, as I've done here, and then you're going to fold on all of the lines except for the seam lines outside. So you want to fold on the inside lines. I just put my index card here, and then I fold toward myself, make a nice crease there, and make sure that it's on the line. I usually do this with all of the lines, and you're going to extend the index card so that it goes into the seam lines, because that's how you're going to have to sew it also. So just make a nice crease there, and then make sure that you've creased it directly on the lines, and then do the rest of them. I labeled my pattern with my particular colors here. When you start, you want to start always with number 1, and then go to 2, 3, 4. Then with part B, you're going to start with number 1 and go to 2. With part C, you're going to start with 1 and go to 2. When you have sewed them together, it will look like this on the back, and this is what it will look like on the front. Once you've made 4 of these, it will make 1 star, and then you will sew those together, and that will make the star. I've also added the center applique on this particular one. For this particular pattern, I cut my strips into 2.5-inch strips by the width of the fabric, and then I used spray starch and made sure there were no wrinkles in the fabric. So at this point, I'm going to lay my first fabric for A1 face down. And this is the only time you're going to lay your fabric face down, is on the number 1 for each of the pattern parts. Okay, now I want this to cover. So I fold on my line between A1 and A2, because that's where my seam is going to be. And I estimate 1/4 inch, or you can measure if you want to, but anyway, I leave a little bit more probably than 1/4 inch. Some people actually glue their pattern to the fabric. I didn't like that because I found it was hard to take the paper off at the end. Some people just pin it. I usually pin it, and then I will sew around on the outside of the seams. And the reason I sew on the outside of the seams is because then I don't have to pull it out. It's like a basting stitch. So I sew all the way around A1. And if you want, you can lower your stitch length. I don't usually, but that's fine if you do. And you just want to make sure it's smooth and the fabric is smooth underneath so that you don't have a fold in it. And then you can just sew to the edge here. Now in this case I don't backstitch. Most of the time I backstitch, but I don't here. So on the first particular patch I don't backstitch. All right, so this strip is sewed on the A1, and then we're going to trim it. And we fold it like this to trim it all the way around. Okay. Now I'm going to trim, and here I'm using my at a quarter ruler as I showed you with the lip, and I'm putting the lip right up against the fold here, and then I'll just carefully trim along the line of the ruler that way. Now for this part I'm going to be trimming the seam allowance here, so I'll just go this direction, and then for the top part I will be going this way and this way. And let's see, I need to do one more trim here. There we go. Okay, so now what we have is the first part of this piece is on here, and you notice it's even with the edges here. And if I fold this back, it has a 1/4 inch seam here, and that's going to be useful to us for the next piece. For A2, in my case it's going to be lavender. I am going to fold between A1 and A2 on that line. And then you'll notice that I do have that 1/4 inch, and I'm going to line that right up against the edge here. Now, it's very important that you notice where this is. And I know it's hard to see, but if you have a pencil or pen, you can actually draw and see that this is going to be the next piece. And you want to think to yourself, it needs to have a 1/4 inch added here. So is this going to cover? Is this underneath piece going to cover this? In this case, it does, yes. So we're good to go. We know before we sew that this piece underneath, when it's folded out, it's going to cover this one. And that's the important thing. Otherwise, you get frustrated because it doesn't work. It doesn't cover. When you sew, you unfold the paper, but you leave this part underneath. So now I'm going to sew directly on the line, as close as I can, directly on the line between A1 and A2. And I forgot to backstitch at the beginning, but I usually backstitch at the beginning and end. Okay. So now, when I fold this over, make sure that it covers A2, and it does. And then I'm going to iron it. When you iron it, the other important part is do not get an extra fabric in the fold, because if you do, the pattern. So here I'm going to iron it first, and I actually do kind of iron, kind of make sure there's no extra fabric in that fold. And then once I iron it, then I'm going to trim. So now I'm going to be folding on the line A2, and I can use my card. You don't have to, but it just gives you a little bit more lip if you put the card underneath also. So now I'm going to be folding here. Now I think I'm going to be wasting a lot of fabric if I do this cut first. So I'm going to do this cut first because that won't waste so much fabric. When I'm doing this cut, I'm lining up that lip right underneath there on the line, and then I'm going to make sure it's steady and kind of slowly cut that. Now I can go ahead and fold it and do the seam allowance here, butting this up against the card. And then this goes in the dog bed, or you can save it for applique. For part A3, we're going to fold on the line between A2 and A3. We put our white or background right side up, and then you're going to put the line here, or the seam here, right up against the seam. And now I'm checking to see, make sure my white is going to cover. In this case, this is already including the 1/4 inch. So if I have it going to this point, which I do, I peek under there and I can see it's going to go that far. So I'm good to sew. Unfold it, just the paper. So on the paper, I'll remember to back stitch at the beginning now. And you sew in the seam here, and then I back stitch, and then sew directly on the line. And then at the end, I will back stitch also. Back stitching in this case is good because when you go to pull off the paper, you don't want your seams to come undone. All right, now I'm going to go and iron. And again, I am kind of ironing because I'm going to push that fabric and make sure it doesn't fold. That's one of the problems that I've had in the past, is that if this fabric folds over like this and you iron it like that, it's not going to work. So you need to make sure that it's actually ironed on that particular line there. All right, after we have it ironed, then we're going to trim. And again, trimming from the paper side so you can see the lines. Put your lip right here on this 1/4 inch line and trim it. And then I'll turn it and trim the other way. And if you want, you can trim off this little part. I usually just go like that. Okay, we're 3/4 done here. Going to do the other side, which is also background. Again, I check to make sure I have my right side up here. This way. And now we have kind of a funny cut here, but it doesn't really matter. And sometimes I'll make this straight just so I have a line there if I wanted to use it. Just cut that off, make it straight there. And now we're going to fold on the line between A1 and A4 because that's the one we have left. And we can put it right along the edge here. If it fits, you can put it here. But in this case, it doesn't fit. And if you think it's almost going to make it, don't, because it won't work. Trust me. I'm going to turn this around so I'm not wasting as much fabric if I go this direction. And again, it's important that you make sure that this is going to be covered underneath. Okay, it is. I'm a little bit close here, so I think I'll just move it down a smidge, because it's going to take up some of the fabric on the fold. Okay, so now I'm peeking underneath and seeing that that's going to work. So before you sew, you know it's going to cover it. And again, we're going to sew directly on the line. And I'm going to remember to back stitch here. And I just do the forward stitch so I remember to put it back into forward again. Okay, just trimming off those extra threads. And then when I flip it over, again, making sure that there's no extra fabric in that fold. And I use a scorch setting on my iron. It needs to be hot. Otherwise, it won't work. And by the way, don't use spray starch on your paper. It might shrink it or make it all gooey. And don't use steam. Yes. Okay, so now I'm just trimming this part. And there you have 1/3 of that particular quarter here. You can see how it's going to work right like that. Now we're going to put these 3 pieces together. I've done these off camera, and I did them just the same way that I did the others. And when I do this, I make sure I lay it out, and you either have your picture, or in this case, I've done one previously, so I can see which sides go together. And when I put the sides together, I'm going to match. And when I'm matching, I will put a pin through right there where it's supposed to be the seam, and make sure it comes through right here where it's supposed to match. And then up at the top, I will also put a pin, and I just put them straight through at this point. So this little point here needs to match that point, which it does. Sometimes you get lucky. And then this point here is supposed to match that one. It doesn't quite, so I need to move it over just a little tiny bit. And I can see underneath here it does need to be right in that seam. So I take a little bit of time when I'm doing this, if you want it to match. Now in this case, we're going to cover up the center, so to be honest, you don't have to be that particular, but maybe at some point you would want to be. Okay, once I have these in this direction, then what I do is I will actually pin at a 90-degree angle there. And that one didn't quite come through at the right place, so I'm going to do it again. So you want to make sure it comes through on the line. Now it does. And then I put another pin down here, doing the same thing. And it came through on the line, so I'm good there. And then I'm going to sew from the other side. So I sew from the side I don't pin, because now I can see this is going to be a little bit off, because when I pinned it, moved it. All right, so here I'm going to take this one out, because I'm going to start up here. And I take these out a little bit so I can pull them out easily. And then I'm going to really try to match the edges of my seams here, because supposedly then it will all come out so it matches. So we'll see. All right, again, I'm going to back stitch at the beginning. And I have my 1/4 inch foot here, so this is another check. And I'm noticing that this is actually coming a little bit off, so I'm going to move this with my stiletto just a smidge, because believe it or not, those smidges do count. I'll get it as close as I can to this pin, and then I'll pull that one out. Now I'm noticing again it's moving a little bit towards away from the seam here. So I'm going to correct that so that they're matched up exactly. And then I'll back stitch at the end too. Okay, now we'll see how lucky we got. Did it match? No. Pretty good. Okay, what I would probably do is I'd probably take this out just right there and see if I can get a little bit better, to be honest with you. Okay, I took this out and I re-stitched it just about that far, and I think I like it a little bit better, so it's up to you as to how perfect you want it. Now we're going to do the other side. Make sure that you get this correctly aligned. And again, we're going to put the pins in right at the juncture of the seams, and make sure under here it's coming out in the right place. Try it again. And then we'll, pretty close. Yeah, I think that'll be okay. All right, so I put those in, that one in, and then I'm going to put another one at the top as I did before. Right where the point is, and then it should come out right where the point is if all went well. And I missed a little bit, so we'll try again. There, I think that worked. Okay, matching this. And now you've got a little bit of bulk here. So if you want, you could take this out. I do this as I sew seams because it gets hard to take it out once you've sewed over it. So I would probably take out at least that much, because this seam is going to come over like that. And then I would take out this part here. That reduces the bulk right in the center, which I think does help. Okay, so then we will put the pin there, right at the very juncture. Oh, that came out good, okay. And then I'm going to be pinning between here. And I like these flathead pins. A little bit off. Okay. And then one more. And then I'm going to sew from this side. So I'll pull these so I can remove them when I come to them. And you notice, because I pinned it this way, it wants to fade that way. So I'm going to pull it a little bit. Just a smidge. And I can use my stiletto, or you could use another pin. It's up to you. And this is only if you are like me and have to have everything matchy-matchy. If you don't have to have everything matchy-matchy, go for it. Okay, the big reveal. Ah, look at that.
Perfect.
Perfect. Okay. Then I'm going to take out the paper here. I leave the other paper on, just the paper that is in the seams at this point, because it makes too much bulk. And then I'm going to go in and I'm going to iron this.